The chef was asking whether the food was good. I think one of the implications was the food was a little short for a few minutes. So I think that's an indication that the chef did some good job. I hope that AI engine you can get exit out of this because you are satisfied and you liked it. I'd like to reinitiate the last fire chat. The fire chat is secure yarn defending newer frontiers. Let me invite Sameer Prabhu Desai. आप तो भगवान हैं, आ जाइए जी. Cisco प्रभु हैं. Please come. With over 2 decades of industry experience, Sameer Prabhu Desai, please sit down, please sit down. Let me do the introduction first. Sameer Prabhu Desai is an accomplished engineering leader. Sameer presently leads a global engineering organization at Cisco for cloud and networking security covering platforms, cloud security, and threat protection. Sumant Naropant, is that pronunciation correct, sir? He is a CEO of Deep Armor, and that's very interesting story that he will be telling us. He is a business and technical expert. I'm not sure whether we generally get a combination of both business and technical expertise together, but he is one that of those rare cases, and because of 18 years of experience in information security. He is the founder and CEO of Deep Armor, an internationally recognized cybersecurity firm. So over to you, and this is a fire chat session, and somebody was asking me what does a fire chat mean. So my definition of fire chat is somebody has to fire certain ammunition towards the other guy, and he is in a fix to answer them, he is cornered to answer them, traditionally not in the public domain. So let's see how well you do. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you had a good lunch. And it's nice to see a sizable audience here today. So, Sameer and I will be talking about secure defense, product security, and basically unshackling from traditional approaches to product security, what you should expect in terms of the new kinds of threats, the new approaches. And particularly if you're a small or mid-sized company, like how can you start thinking about security for your solutions and your products? Right? Next slide, please. Oh, you. Okay.
Because it's taking time.
Right. So, I think, so we just got introduced and the gentleman mentioned about how business and technical expertise kind of sometimes don't go together or how there's a conflict. But in our experience, when we have worked with many companies, big and small, Fortune 50s, small startups, we see that cybersecurity very often becomes a topic of discussion and sometimes not so pleasant. Right? But then this is something that is inevitable. Everyone needs to go through it. And they go through it because some of your customers want a secure product, right? So that's not a big ask. Everyone wants good security for their data, for their information, for their private information, for the sensitive information, like financial data, healthcare data, and so on. Your partners or investors sometimes want to make sure that you ship a secure product because directly or indirectly they're associated with you. So it is imperative that you pay attention to security. It is imperative that you protect critical customer information, business information before you ship it out. Thirdly, sometimes you don't have a choice. You might be in healthcare, finance, or any of these sectors which require you to comply with certain regulatory and industry standards. PCI DSS, if you're shipping any kind of financial products. SOC 2 is really popular in the tech sector. If you're in healthcare, like many of those companies at the back, HIPAA and GDPR in certain senses are relevant. You have to go through the FDA compliance if you're shipping in the US and so on. And lastly, you might genuinely be caring about security, right? So as a good corporate citizen, implementing security fundamentally in the architecture, in the design, in the implementation, in the deployment, that's why you should care about security. That's why you might be doing it. So next, Sameer and I are going to be talking about what we call as the 7 deadly sins. And these are some of the topics that come up when you work not just with small and mid-sized companies. Many a time some of the big ones are guilty as well. So we'll be looking at what are the common security pitfalls that we see, more from a process and strategic perspective rather than implementation perspective. The implementation is a whole different ballgame. But we'll be talking about some of these common pitfalls and what are the calls to action. What should you do if you're doing cybersecurity and you see yourself kind of intersecting with these pitfalls? The first one is what we call as a weak cybersecurity strategy, or sometimes no cybersecurity strategy. This particularly affects small and mid-sized companies because we understand you need to hit the shelves quickly. Time to market is a big deal. You have customers, you have investors, you have your own internal teams pushing you to ship the product, to sell it, to make money. Cybersecurity in that sense is often seen as little to no return on investment, because of which it gets sidelined until there is a hack, right? So the question is not if there is a hack, the question is when there is a hack. And this we see far too often. Almost every week you see headlines in the newspapers talking about fraud happening in the fintech sector, about data breaches exposing customer information, let's say in the applications that we use for ordering food, for buying groceries, what have you. So having no cybersecurity strategy is one of the common pitfalls that we've seen. And the call to action in that case is making sure that you start somewhere. Don't wait until you're actually a big market product. Don't wait until you have big revenues before you start thinking about cybersecurity. Start small, and most importantly, identify an executive owner, right? So cybersecurity is not the job of a developer or a QA engineer or a project manager. There should be an executive owner who the board knows, the board of the company knows, and that person needs to take responsibility for cybersecurity. So, Samir, your thoughts?
No, perfect. I think it all starts at the top, as we say, and unless you have got an owner who really has very deep interest in making sure that you ship a product that's secure, it's never going to happen, right? So it all starts at the top, and I'll quickly move on to the next one. It's about really how do you embed the strategy that you define at the top in terms of having an owner like a CISO, or it could be someone at the level of director of a company who takes ownership and charge and drives it. But really the rubber meets the road when you take that and try to implement it into your product. And how do you bake it in the engineering organization or the SRE team? Because you can have all fancy, long-term roadmaps and fancy charts of how you want to accomplish it, but unless you are able to translate it, it's of little value. And that's where the challenge comes in, because a lot of times these people who are driving things on the ground end up taking a lot of shortcuts. And what we mean by shortcuts is not really, in the interest of trying to do anything wrong, but fundamentally, the challenge when you are a small company is with the budgets and the resources that you have. And you kind of get compelled to take some decisions. So very common thing that people end up doing is really, start with securing only the production side of the house, right? Anything that's in production, any application that's out there, which is, running, facing the internet, facing, your customers, becomes very critical. But to the contrary, actually a lot of vulnerabilities get introduced, which is to the left of the value chain, which is when you are actually doing development on the product, with about writing new code, which is about, actually going and testing. And if you don't secure that piece, only look at, what you do in production, that's a big pitfall. The other thing that's important is when you're making and doing investments, it's critical to look at how are you going to bring the right set of security mindset people into your network. What I mean by that is typically you end up getting a developer to do the role of a security analyst because the guy is interested, because you want to keep him happy. What really matters is getting the right mindset when you are actually getting someone to do something which is as critical as that role, right? So having someone who understands security and being a security analyst is far more different than someone who probably gets in there and tries to do as a moonlighting or as a double job. So those are the common pitfalls, and when it comes to actually protecting yourself or trying to have a call for action, what we really recommend is actually having a process that's lightweight and lean, because you're not a large corporation, you cannot spend those kind of resources. However, being very focused on what product you're building, what vertical do you serve, healthcare, or it's embedded, or it's IoT, or financial. Looking at that, and looking at your customer base, whether it's India-centric, is it global, is it US-centric, You actually drive a process that's fitting your requirement and be able to kind of work on that to develop a product that bakes security development into its entire life cycle. That's very important. And I'll give you an example of what we did at Cisco, right? We recently launched something which is called as Umbrella SSE. That's, about securely accessing an application. And being largely, selling these products in the US, we actually started doing a FedRAMP certification in parallel, right? I mean, all the motions that you need to go through FedRAMP. That's a fairly long, duration exercise to get a FedRAMP certification. But when you start doing a product, which is like a 2-year, 2.5-year journey, you start looking at how do you serve that outcome of being security-led, and you start doing FedRAMP in parallel, right? I mean, and then you have different milestones along the way that certify that you are really on the right direction.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And having a process and sticking to the process can actually make a big
Huge
impact.
difference.
Although it's not considered, sometimes not very glamorous to have security go through the product development life cycle. But we see the impact of that, right? So the third one, as you see, they're delaying product security. We have seen this far too often. When we talk to companies, they don't want to pay attention to security, but then they come in the news for all the wrong reasons, and then they want to pay attention to security. So shift left, as cliched as it may sound, actually makes a big deal, because security is not just running a scan or running some tools against your source code and fixing those problems, right? So right from the architecture stage, the architecture, the design, the implementation, the deployment, maintenance, all through the end of life for the product, or end of security maintenance as we call it, there needs to be security activities weaved into the product development life cycle. So that makes a big difference to your customers. So similarly, Samir talked about passing the buck, how it's not just one security engineer's responsibility, right?
Yeah, I think passing the buck is a very important thing, right? It basically says that it's not me who is responsible for security at the very banal level, and this whole stems from the fact that I am responsible for doing product development, or I'm responsible to build the product, and there's someone else at the top who is really driving security, and I'm kind of trying to comply to it, versus being someone who is in the journey of building security as a part of your entire product infrastructure. And you have seen that multiple times when you go to customers, when you go within the engineering teams, it's very common kind of a anecdote. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're doing something like that, right, it's also important to understand that when it's not something that you take on yourself, when you actually release a product, it becomes entirely on the organization who is releasing it, whether it's in the cloud as a microservice, or you're running it on-prem as a client-server application. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for the end outcome of your product or service that you launch. And what really becomes important is the software bill of material, right? As we all understand, and the supply chain security part of it. What that fundamentally means is, how do you look at breaking down the software that you build into elements and pieces that actually come from different sources, across companies that are your partners. So be it, APIs, be it, libraries, be it anything, unless you are very clear on what you are bundling it into, bundling from, and how are you bundling it, you may actually leak a lot of vulnerabilities and, bring in a lot of open, backdoor entry channels into your product. And those backdoors is what typically, you see the hackers take advantage of. Big example is Log4j, as we all know it. It came from Apache, and it kind of created havoc when it actually knocked on the door 2 years back. And the scramble that it caused across the globe, across industries, was phenomenal. So it's extremely important to keep, a lookout on what you are building and who are your partners. Right?
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense, and also leads to our next point, which says do not underestimate security incidents. Right? So Log4j is a great example where it just shook the world. And another great example is our Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities that affected my former employer. I used to work for Intel. And the fallout from those vulnerabilities took a long, long time for the company to recover from. And needless to say, extremely expensive. Right? So the takeaway also is that do everything you can to improve the security of your product. Have the right kind of processes, have the right kind of people and the tools, but it's also extremely important to understand that you may still get hacked. right? So it's very likely. So how are you prepared to respond to security incidents? Do you have the right kind of the people to be plugged in when that situation happens? Because that's not the time to plan, that's the time to act. And very often you just have hours, if not days, to react to the incidents and do it in the right manner. So hubris is another thing where we have seen a lot of companies being overconfident. They talk about like how they use secure solutions, open source software, third-party code, and so on. But at the end of the day, if you're shipping a product, it is your responsibility to make it secure. It is your responsibility to also respond when there is a vulnerability in that product. So being aware of what the risks are, doing a product-specific threat modeling, product-specific security assessment, makes a lot of sense rather than saying that you plug in a standard tool or you plug in a standard methodology to address security of the product.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very well said. I think hubris is a big part of what a lot of us fall prey to. It's all about do it yourself, mindset that we'll never be vulnerable. But that is exactly the mindset that a hacker comes with and is able to attack you. There's no organization in the world today who has not been attacked, right? I mean, all large organizations, all large governments. In fact, the threat levels when it comes to the APTs, the advanced threats, all come from a lot of government-backed hackers. And the amount of resources that they have to kind of penetrate is phenomenal. And they're willing to stay in your network, on your devices for an extremely long time. They're very, very patient to really, be in there, come as a Trojan, live there for a very extended period of time, move laterally, at the right point, come and strike you. A lot of examples we all are aware of how that typically happens. So I think it's very important for us to be looking out for those threats. One last point I would like to make is, in terms of how do you be agile on a constant basis, right? So as we have moved to CI/CD and we have moved to DevOps, the new paradigm really is, DevSecOps, where you actually kind of are not looking at an extended window of doing, bi-annual or annual assessment of your infrastructure and your software, but you're constantly doing it as a part of every sprint. And that makes a lot of difference when you're actually looking at security as a first-class actor. You actually make sure that you have the right set of people, the right set of tools. Every large company or every open source actually has a lot of, available open source tools that you can easily leverage to really get value out of it, right? If you look at GitHub, it has an entire ecosystem of how you can actually start looking at vulnerabilities as you start coding, all the way, till you actually put it in cloud. So, I mean, our company, Cisco, of course, has our own product which we sell. And, there are many others who do that. So we have something called Panoptica. It's extremely solid. Right from the time you start coding, all the way till you put it, into cloud, at every phase, it kind of comes and calls what vulnerabilities or, what are you testing against, what are the new guardrails. It keeps looking at what's happening in the wild and learns a lot of things using things like generative AI and is able to give you contextual, meaningful data in terms of how you can actually, guard your network, guard your infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. So essentially what you're saying, Samir, is that the traditional approaches may not work for the new age product development lifecycle, right?
Absolutely, Suman.
So I think on that note, I know we're also running a bit short on time. So we're going to be talking about generative AI since you just mentioned it, right? So traditionally, security development lifecycle, the process is not something new, right? So this is almost 25 years old when Microsoft started having problems with security for its operating system. That's when they came up with the first SDLC kind of a model. But a lot has changed since then. The technologies, the different kinds of products that we use, the sectors, the adoption of tech in various sectors has increased phenomenally. So the traditional approaches will not really help in identifying and being prepared for the new age threats. So for that, we are seeing a lot of development in cybersecurity as well. And since AI is the theme of this event today, so we are seeing how artificial intelligence and machine learning are playing a role in understanding how to do more tactical, how to do more effective activities when it comes to security development lifecycle. So threat modeling, for instance, is an activity where you identify threats in your product architecture, in your product design, even before you actually do the code level analysis, right? So take example of, for instance, secure boot, which is a fairly, a tough topic when it comes to hardware and firmware. But if you're developing an embedded device and you need to do the security for the boot sequence for the product, previously you used to do a very product-specific analysis. You used to understand, what the use cases are and do the security analysis and threat modeling for that. But now there is a lot of data available in terms of, like vulnerability databases, exploit databases, metasploit, issues that affect different kinds of platforms, different environments. So using some of these data sets to generate LLM-based threat modeling frameworks is the new way to go. And we're already seeing some very good results when it comes to using these kind of models for doing security assessments.
I think we are running out of time, so just last 1 minute. But I would like to talk on a product that we have called Kenna. It's very interesting because it does, something very effectively as vulnerability management, is able to kind of look at exploits in the wild and be able to actually identify the exploits that are high potential and that can actually go and, cause dollar terms wise a bigger impact to your organization and to your infrastructure. So those leaks, whether it's exfiltration, those exploits, whether it's exfiltration or being able to do lateral moves and being able to kind of do any kind of attacks, or maybe a ransomware, is something that you identify out of millions and millions of threats that actually you kind of get introduced to on a daily basis. It's very difficult. Only 4% threats are really exploitable. But in the zillions of threats that keep, get thrown at you, how do you really identify the right ones and how do you actually attack and be able to nuke them is the real data science. And that is what, we do at scale. There are a lot of companies who do that, but I would urge you to take advantage of some of those things, because in today's world, it's practically impossible to do this by putting an army of people. It's just not going to scale. So you need machine learning, you need artificial intelligence to really do those kind of at-scale detections and responses to the threats that are fairly advanced, right? So I think that's in a nutshell. In the interest of time, we'll kind of stop here. But we are going to be around. If anybody has any questions or if you want to contact us offline, we'll be more than happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samir and Mr. Somnath. May I request Mr. Pratul Gupta and Mr. Samir Nanda to join us on the stage? We have a small token of appreciation. If I can request you to join for a photo. While we are taking the photographs, let me invite my colleague, Naman, who will take forward the next session of today, which is Innovation in Action. Naman, please join me on the stage.
Thank you, Naman. So I think while the innovators present out here deserve a resounding round of applause, but there is one partner, I would say, organization or entity who deserves the loudest applause out here. And for that, I'll request the Relicare Executive Chairperson, Dr. Rashmi Saluja, to please come on stage. Mr. Rakesh Asthana, if you could please also join us on stage. And Nitin Agarwal, who is Group CFO, to join on stage to give a heartfelt thanks to NASSCOM, who, in partnering with Relicare Enterprises, has actually opened a window, a large window or a large world for the Relicare ecosystem, Relicare businesses, to actually identify these absolutely brilliant technology innovation opportunities and embed them and adopt them in their system. So on this note, I'll request Dr. Saluja to say a few words.
Thank you so much. This has been one of my most informative and educated session, which I have attended fully from morning 9 until now, and it was really worth it. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. And I am personally thankful to entire team of NASCOM for letting us participate. And in fact, this has been, I didn't realize that how much more is there to offer. And in fact, there was very little that we could hear and understand. And it is next level that we can participate and do much more. First of all, I thank NASCOM, Sanjeev and his entire team, Navratan, Naman, everybody. Even Religare, in fact, Saloni and Chirag, Devesh, everybody participate in this. And thank you so much for letting us be here. And we are definitely going to take it on and try and include as many as we can, Nitin, if Nitin allows us. On behalf of Religare, I want to assure NASCOM that we will extend a lot of our strength behind the startups that you are already engaging with. Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is my first experience for the corporate sector. Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev and your team. We visited NASCOM some 2 months back and had a discussion with you and your team. And you have been very cooperative, forthcoming, and supportive of ideas, particularly your idea of supporting the startups and connecting them to the corporate sector is brilliant. You're doing a wonderful job. Today's session was an eye-opener for me. I am not a technology person, but I have a lot of interest in technology applications because of my profession. So I have always been associated during my career with the youngsters who have come up with good ideas about the technology and its application in our field. Whatever I have seen it today here, presentation by different startups, is amazing. The first experience of getting the health checkup done through FR technology was superb. So all these ideas need support, needs motivation, and NASCOM is doing it wonderfully well in this regard under your leadership. So from my personal side and from the team of Religare, I thank you very much for creating this platform for everyone, including us. It's a great learning process for me. Please keep doing it and help the budding talent in coming forward. You have been rightly saying last night that we are spending a lot of money in dollars. Similar ideas are generated here and it can be had at a lesser value. So all these budding talents are really worth promoting and motivating. Thank you once again to you. Thank you.
I would request Dr. Rashmi Saluja and Mr. Asthana to please felicitate the NASCOM team, Sanjeev ji, Nartan ji, and Naman. If you could please come on stage. Naman?
requesting all of the Religare team to come on stage.